Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now,
yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
After the American Revolution, Spain regained control of Florida from Britain as part of the Treaty of Paris. When the British evacuated Florida, Spanish colonists as well as settlers from the newly formed United States came pouring in. Many of these new residents were lured by favorable Spanish terms for acquiring property called land grants. Even Seminoles were encouraged to set up farms because they provided a buffer between Spanish Florida and the United States. Escaped slaves also entered Florida, trying to reach a place where their U.S. masters had no authority over them. Instead of becoming more Spanish, Florida increasingly became more American. When Britain controlled Florida, the British often incited Seminoles against American settlers who were migrating south into Seminole territory. These old conflicts, combined with the safe haven Seminoles provided black slaves, caused the U.S. Army to attack the tribe in the First Seminole War beginning in 1817, which took place in Florida and southern Georgia. Forces under General Andrew Jackson invaded Spanish Florida, attacked several key locations, and pushed the Seminoles farther south into Florida. Finally, after several official and unofficial U.S. military expeditions into the territory, Spain formally ceded Florida to the United States in 1821, according to the terms of the Adams-Onis Treaty. As soon as the United States acquired Florida, it began urging the Indians there to leave their lands and relocate along with other southeastern tribes to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Some Seminole leaders signed a treaty in 1832, and part of the tribe moved. But other Seminoles refused to recognize the treaty and fled into the Florida Everglades. The Treaty of Payne's Landing, signed by a small number of Seminoles in May of 1832, required Indians to give up their Florida lands within 3 years and move west. When the U.S. Army arrived in 1835 to enforce the treaty, the Indians were ready for war. As Major Francis Dade marched from Fort Brooke toward Fort King, 180 Seminole warriors, led by Micanopy, Alligator, and Jumper, attacked. Only one man of that Army detachment survived the ambush. The campaigns of the Second Seminole War were an outstanding demonstration of guerrilla warfare by the Seminole. Fewer than 3,000 warriors were pitted against more than 30,000 U.S. troops. The Second Seminole War, usually referred to as the Seminole War proper, was the fiercest war waged by the U.S. government against American Indians. The United States spent more than $20 million fighting the Seminoles. The war left more than 1,500 soldiers and uncounted American civilians dead. And the obvious duplicity of the U.S. government's tactics marred Indian-white relations throughout the country for future generations. As hostilities dragged on, frustrated U.S. forces increasingly turned to desperate measures to win the war. For example, Chief Osceola was captured and imprisoned when he met with U.S. troops who had called for a truce and claimed to want to talk peace. With Osceola in prison, the United States was confident the war would soon end, but it did not. Although Osceola died in prison in 1838, other Seminole leaders kept the battle going on for a few more years. In 1842, a nominal end to the hostilities arrived, though no peace treaty was ever signed. By this time, most Seminoles had been moved from Florida and relocated to Indian Territory, today's Oklahoma. A third Seminole War broke out in 1855 when conflicts, largely over land, arose between whites and some Seminoles who remained in Florida. Constant military patrols and rewards for the capture of Indians reduced the Seminole population to about 200 when the Third Seminole War ended in 1858. And that concludes this edition of the Historian's Almanac. Thank you for listening to the program. The Historian's Almanac can be heard exclusively on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm your host, Dr. William Lester. And remember, history comes alive on the Historian's Almanac.